Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Partnerships with Purpose podcast. We're going to explore ways to engage communities through service learning projects and research. I'm Cedric Shai with the Texas Target Communities Program at Texas A&M University. We're hoping these stories will highlight and inspire more community-engaged partnerships. All right, we're recording, we're rolling.
We're rolling.
So today we have Dr. Nathanael Rosehenheim. He's a research associate professor, and he is the research director of the Hazard Reduction and Recovery Program. Is that right?
Hazard Reduction and Recovery Center.
Center, yeah, not program.
HRRC.
HRRC. Everything we have in A&M is acronyms. So I'm kind of a new guy here trying to understand all the acronyms. But yeah, he works for the HRRC. And kind of before we get into what you guys do with HRRC, what led you to community engaged research work?
So my initial background and connection, I'm a 3-time Aggie. So my undergrad is from A&M, and then my master's and my PhD are all from A&M.
So, and what were those majors? My
undergrad was electrical engineering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which
I actually didn't know that.
yeah, fun fact. And then I was in the Air Force after my undergrad, and then after I got out of the Air Force, decided to go back to school. And part of what motivated me to go back into urban planning is I got to see, when I was in the Air Force, I got to see the world, got to see all kinds of places. I grew up in Texas, and so most of my perspective on cities was Texas cities. And when I got to see cities in Europe and Asia and North Africa, just really opened my mind to what a city could be and what's, all the different diversity of how people organize themselves and create different urban forms. So that motivated me to think about urban planning. And so I did my master's degree in urban planning here at A&M. And at the time, Texas Target Communities was a closet on the third floor of Langford. That would have been my initial opportunity to do community engagement. And then in school, we learned about the theories of community engagement and why community engagement was important. After that, I worked for Texas A&M Transportation Institute, TTI, and we also did a larger project where we were looking at hazardous cargo and how that hazardous cargo was transported around Texas, so by highways, trains, pipelines, and we worked with counties in Texas to see what the hazardous cargo was doing. In that case, I was mainly just a data person. We collected data, we went out in the field, stood by the side of highways and counted trucks, and
all the fun stuff.
Yeah, and tried to see got an opportunity to see that how my research could help a community and how the work that we do in planning can benefit communities. In that case, we were trying to make sure what schools were nearby and could be at risk, like if there was a spill or a train crash, or what would be the consequences for the community. That was also my initial experience kind of thinking about planning as it related to hazards. In this case, like a technological hazard. So while I was working at TTI, I realized that I didn't really have skills to do the kind of research that I was interested in. And I was also interested in looking at more issues related to food security, food access, how communities can grow their own food. And that was a passion of mine. And I lived in Germany for 3.5 years. And in Germany, they're much agriculture, from my perspective, seemed like it was much more integrated into the urban landscape. So you'd see farms near high-rise buildings, or there were farmers markets, and people had allotment gardens near their house. And so there was exposure to, and also just exposure to really good food, and just seeing what, tasting fresh food and getting that experience, which I maybe could have had growing up as a kid in Texas, but just wasn't a part of my experience as a kid.
That that experience just traveled with you through all your extra degrees. And
it stuck there. And I had thought about maybe becoming a farmer. There was a student farm here on campus. We had a tractor. We had a couple acres. And I realized that Texas is really hot during the summer. And I figured that maybe I could research and do help food systems through my research and through urban planning.
Wow. So tell us about what you do at the HRRC.
If you were to look into my office, I would be sitting at my computer staring at multiple screens. And,
this is true.
And I would be my primary focus of research is looking at population and economic data to help represent what is actually going on in a community. So with that, it's usually looking at census data from the decennial census or the American Community Survey, looking at data from the Center for Economic Studies, looking at employment data, school data, health data, and giving communities a foundation for the state of the community. What's happening, who lives in the community, what are the characteristics of the people that live in the community, who works in the community, where do they work, how do they, what are the dynamics of the community. And we are specifically looking at the characteristics of the community that might suggest issues with lack of access to resources or systematic issues with parts of the community that have limited access to a resource, areas of a community that if there are limited resources for doing mitigation projects, or if there's limited resources to help with recovery, what parts of the community would there be a bigger benefit? So trying to help decision makers who are looking at their community recognize the issues that are underlying problems within a community. And we have a clear view that in a community, if you have disadvantages that exist prior to a disaster, so say you have a part of the community that is underserved, underrepresented, that doesn't have access to, and one of my passions is access to, say, grocery stores. If those disadvantages and disparities in access exist prior to a disaster, then after a disaster, those disparities are going to be experienced in a more extreme way to the areas that already were disadvantaged prior to the disaster. And oftentimes, as the recovery process, which can take years after a disaster, places that were more disadvantaged prior to the disaster will see even greater, that disadvantage will increase in the years following a disaster. So our efforts are to help communities understand where those disparities are in access prior to not having a disaster, so that they understand that if they can help reduce those disparities on a chronic issue level, day-to-day basis, that their community is going to recover in a more holistic way after a disaster.
I want to ask you specifically about researchers and communities, and kind of what have you seen that relationship to be like? Maybe what are some weak points and what are some strengths, just even in your own personal experience?
Right. Often, in my experience, the researchers are, and I've seen some cases, both good cases and cases that could be better. Oftentimes, as a researcher, I've been guilty of this, is seeing a community as a source of data for me to study a problem and get a journal article out of it, or get funding,
finish your degree.
Finish my degree, get funding on a grant. That's usually because as a researcher, I don't have a relationship with a community. There's no connection with the community but I need, there's a problem. I'm trying to solve the problem. It is usually like with, say, food access, is a problem that is a recognized severe problem in our communities across the United States and the world. Without a relationship with a community, it's often like it is easy is not the right word, but it's the path of least resistance. Is if you have the funding, if you have money for rental cars, money to pay for graduate students to do field work after a disaster. It's sometimes you don't necessarily think about the community as a independent partner. You just think of the community as a place you can drive into and do research and then drive out.
Yeah.
so sometimes that's called parachuting in.
Yeah. Where
researchers just kind of go into a community, collect whatever information they're trying to collect, and often in my experience, that's talking to households, talking to families, and saying, how were you impacted by a disaster? How long were you out of your house? Did you have access? How long did you have access to a grocery store? Were your kids able to go to school? Just what were some of those impacts?
Those equity questions
after a disaster, and so that without that relationship with the community, it is possible just to go in and get that information and then leave, and then use that new research data to try to answer questions. And I do think sometimes in those situations, what is beneficial is not necessarily the data collection. It's the opportunities for the researchers to see to actually be there in that space, to see the piles of debris outside of people's houses, to see, to hear those stories, to learn, to actually see with your own eyes how communities can be devastated by a disaster. And sometimes what's also has been really powerful for me is within a community to see that parts of a community can be devastated, and then other parts of the community just look like nothing ever happened. and those parts of a community, they can be really basically right next to each other.
Yeah.
But it's night and day as to how the disaster has impacted. And sometimes when you look at the news, or if you don't see it for yourself, you kind of assume everything's been devastated. Everybody's been equally impacted by the natural hazard.
Wow.
And that the disaster is equally experienced. And seeing it firsthand has really taught me, and I think given opportunities to a lot of the researchers that I've worked with, the opportunity to have a more nuanced understanding of how disasters impact communities, and hearing people's stories is really, really powerful. I mean, the data, I love looking at data. I love sitting at my computer, staring at a monitor for 8 hours a day. I probably do love it too much. But the getting out with communities, working with communities directly, talking with the people who live in a community is just transformative in terms of being able to understand the problem better.
Yeah, and what you said there, that just impacted me just now. I think thinking about the news and thinking about devastation, I don't ever think like, well, what if there are other areas that had lots of resources and I don't ever think about those other areas that may have been disproportionately funded or resourced, where like they actually bounce back really quickly.
Right.
And you as a researcher, you're like, I want to know why, and let's distribute that maybe a little bit more equally. How do you see researchers continue to make a positive impact on communities in the future, or even in your role right now? You teach and you do lots of research with the HRRC. How do you see you guys kind of inserting research and data collection just for the better of communities around Texas?
Well, the evolution I've seen in how the funding for research has happened in the last 10 years, where there's much more of a focus and motivation to have community engagement. Community engagement has been elevated to the level of, actually having community partners that are part of the grant writing process. They're part of from the very beginning, understood that that these community partners are going to receive funding, that they're not just nebulous, we're going to find a community after we get the funding, but actually having communities involved in the research development and research project. We've learned a lot from working with indigenous communities and tribal nations to understand that I personally like to take that model of anytime I work with a community to treat them as if they are their own nation, to have that view of the community elevated to the point of saying, I want to make sure that I have that relationship with their council, who are the leaders in that community, to make sure that we've have their blessing and that we see their data as their data.
Yes.
And not, I'm going to take this information, and kind of what I would see as the future of community engagement is research institutions who have consistent, trustworthy relationships with communities before the big ideas of the research are decided in a room somewhere. The great, you want to be in the room.
Exactly. Exactly. Man, that's awesome.
Bringing communities into that, and I think the Hazard Reduction Recovery Center, with our deep relationship with Texas Target Communities, I've seen that much more where we're especially. I feel like Southeast Texas has become our we
live there.
our the place that we have this deep connection with, and it's building and it's growing, and we have this past you were part of the summer dash program. Having students coming, like high school students, and doing outreach. We have, I don't know how many projects we have going on in Southeast Texas.
A lot.
It's a lot. And I hope the community, those relationships with the community are just become stronger and deeper, so that in the future, when these big, when we put together these big research projects that often are funded at the $1 million, $5 million, $20 million level, these are they're big projects that the communities are very much a part of that idea. I'm not just sitting in a room by myself thinking up ideas of what I think is like for food access or for disaster recovery, that we actually have those relationships with the community and can focus our energies and focus our attention on the ideas that the community is actually
it's like letting the local knowledge drive the research.
Hopefully
that's great. I think that's noble, and that's something that we say at TTC. We say respect local knowledge, and we say sow seeds of trust. Well, man, I appreciate this conversation. Any closing thoughts you have for us?
Any closing thoughts? I think a lot of my passion and motivation to do the work that I do exists because of having worked with communities. And I think if I had only just sat in a room and done the research at a distance, I probably wouldn't have the motivation and the excitement that I do have. I see that happen with students a lot, where it's great to do something in the classroom here in College Station, Texas, but as soon as students go out and talk to a community and go to a public meeting or build those relationships with the community directly, a lot of times they're like, oh, like this, what we're doing actually can have an impact. And oftentimes the takeaways are the community's interested in something totally different than what I thought they were interested in. So this is really good. So I hope I hope the listeners of this podcast go out and see about the importance of working with communities and having that positive relationship between research and community engagement.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rosenheim. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
I appreciate it. Thanks for listening, guys. If you'd like to learn more about our program, check out our Instagram at TAMUTXTC, or head on over to our website, tx.ag/TXTC.